Well, good evening, everyone. How are you guys doing tonight? Welcome to another Pretty Gritty Tours virtual event. You know the drill at this point. We're going to do our general housekeeping really quick. Make sure that everyone can hear me, see me, and say a quick prayer that everything goes according to plan tonight. Let's Oh man, we already have a pun in here. Thank you, Nick, for starting us off right. You really, we're going full steam ahead right now. Zing. Game, set, match. Let's do this. So tonight, I'd like to thank my personal sponsor, Bullet Bourbon, the Frontier Whiskey. Well, bourbon. But we're also mixing into it tonight a special treat. I know a lot of people would traditionally do orange peel in their old fashioned. I prefer to use either Grand Marnier or Cointreau. Put a little more orange liquor into the whole thing. Also using the Edgefield Estate Aztec Chocolate Bitters tonight. I don't know if you guys are familiar with the McMenamins Elks Lodge Temple here in downtown Tacoma. If you're not familiar yet, get acquainted. This gem right here, built in 1916, was the Elks Lodge for the city of Tacoma for a long period of time until it fell abandoned and derelict, and then was just an empty shell with cool graffiti inside for a long time until the McMenamin brothers out of Oregon, famous for taking historic properties and injecting new life into them while keeping that sort of historic flair, purchased the property and turned it into a hotel, brewery, restaurant, smorgasbord music venue. It's a whole thing. It's awesome. And they sell their whole array of both liquors, beers, and wines that they produce as part of the McMenamins empire. So cheers to that, my friend. Ooh, boy. Oh, man. The one thing I truly regret at this point is that I haven't brought out a train whistle. And my son is obsessed with trains, so that's just my failing at this point. And I'm sorry to have done that to you all. Also, just a quick reminder, because we've grown so popular that scammers have caught on. If anyone's asking you to create an account to view this tour, just ban them from your life. Eject them. We will never ask you to create an account to view any of our virtual tours. All of our virtual tours are free. If for any reason that you did enjoy your tour, you can always tip your guide. Right on the homepage of prettygrittytours.com, there is a PayPal link where you can tip if you enjoyed yourself and you're feeling generous. But other than that, we won't ask for anything from you guys other than that you keep an open mind and you enjoy yourselves. So let's get in there. Also, a quick shout out to our top fan, Mark Clark. Glad to have you guys here tonight. So let's do this. I don't know what you guys know about Stampede Pass Tunnel, Stampede Tunnel, but it is arguably the single most important piece of infrastructure in Tacoma's history. It was the reason that Tacoma continued to operate at all, and certainly as successfully as it did. For those of you who don't know, a little backstory about Tacoma. It was called the City of Destiny, where rails meet sails, because it's perched on Commencement Bay, a naturally deep water port with a nice shallow grade out of it, so you could bring a railroad right up to the shoreline and a tall ship. They could basically kiss sides, onload, offload cargo without putting a ton of money into it. You know, for example, Olympia, which is the capital of Washington State, Bud Inlet there requires just an intense amount of upkeep to get it dredged constantly to make it deep enough for large ships to go down there. So Tacoma was a natural choice to become the terminus for the Great East-West Railway. But when they laid that inaugural spike connecting the terminus, they left a gap of about 20 to 30 miles from the city of Tacoma to the rest of the railway that connected the country. It might be the same people who designed that hairpin turn, that 90-degree angle off of Highway 16. There's some fun infrastructure in the area. But the decision was made that something had to be done to connect that railway, and Stampede Tunnel is what they came up with. So if you guys are ready for that, I say we jump in 2 feet and just go from there. I figured it would make the most sense if maybe I showed you where Stampede Pass and Stampede Tunnel are today. The craziest part of this whole thing for me is that it's a functional tunnel. The Burlington Northern Santa Fe Railroad is the current owner of that line, and it is still an operational tunnel. So let's take you on a journey to see where we're talking about. So flying into Washington State here, just in case you didn't get it, Washington, just south of Interstate 90, where Whittier is, the small, it's not a town, the small area of Martin, right here at Meany Lodge, which, after this tour is done, just Google some pictures of Meany Lodge. It is an experience. It's don't expect anything from The Shining. Don't expect like Great Wolf. It's you'll see. But right here where the railway is, you can see the entrance. This is the eastern entrance to Stampede Tunnel, and then it extends 1.9 miles through the Cascades until it exits over here by Sunday Creek. And you can see the snow shelter on the top of it there to prevent the tunnel from getting enclosed. All of these Forest Service roads in the area out there are ones that you can go out and do some, not necessarily off-roading, but certainly some very view-heavy drives out there. And it's a highly recommended one for Washington State. This also intersects the Pacific Crest Trail. So I think the Stampede Pass area has like a 12-mile loop that you can cut your teeth on if you're curious about doing the Pacific Crest Trail all the way from Canada down to Mexico. Pretty sweet. That is actually an interesting story about that, and I don't want to jump ahead of it, but yeah, there are some cool pioneers that have gone through this tunnel. But let's go back to the beginning really quick. So Stampede Pass. This is the sort of old school, I think this was like a 1950s map that showed sort of the area. And really sort of gave the feel. You can see Leavenworth prominently displayed up there, and then all the tiny little towns along the way. And all of these are railroad towns, more or less. They popped up to serve the railroad in the area and then have either faded or thrived afterwards based on a whole list of reasons. But again, if you're looking at it later, this gives you sort of the layout. There's Meany Lodge and the tunnel entrance in the ski area. Again, this is on the east side of Stampede Pass Tunnel. So our story is going to begin in 1873. As soon as Tacoma becomes the terminus for the railroad, it became the it town for all the money people. And suddenly there were a bunch of fat cat railroad tycoons that were like, all right, we have to put some serious money into this, guys, because we want to make it. And if you could control the terminus, you were Uncle Pennybags, because you had the port, you had people coming in, spending money in Tacoma. You had people then exiting Tacoma, leaving perhaps their fortunes on the way out. And then all of the goods coming in. It was going to be just this major hub. If you've at all seen the West Coast or even heard the name Seattle, you know that things played out a little differently for Tacoma, but that's an entirely different tour. What we're really focused on right now is its heyday here. So all these ads were running at the time about the Northern Pacific Railroad just going to become the Hail Mary for everything. It was going to turn Tacoma into the biggest and most important city on the northern half of the West Coast. And then Union Station, pictured here, is actually still here in Tacoma, in case you're not from the area. This is currently our federal courthouse. After the building fell out of use in the 1980s with the railway not being as popular as it used to be, it was also derelict for a while until federal funds got poured into it, turned it into the courthouse, and it became a refurbished and beautiful part of our history down there today. As far as Stampede Pass is concerned, a huge nod goes to our boy here, Virgil Bogue. He's the badass right front and center on a white mule with a bowler hat. And if you ever find yourself wondering, am I cool enough? Look beneath you, and if you're not astride a white mule and wearing a bowler hat, the answer is probably no. You should try a little harder in your life. Virgil Bogue is just a hugely influential figure in the Pacific Northwest that not a ton of people know about. But he gets the credit for a lot of different things. He got the contract to go and scout the Cascade route to look for this way to get a train either over the mountain or through the mountain. And that was back in 1881. But he gets his start when he's born in, I believe, 1846, back in New York. He goes to the Rensselaer, which is always difficult to say, Polytech Institute in Troy, New York. And he actually receives a degree for civil engineering, and he works on projects in New Zealand, Australia, all up and down the West Coast. He's actually the guy who is credited for naming the city of Pasco, Washington. I don't know if anyone else went to Pasco High School. A little hometown pride right there. Go Bulldogs. And for me, that's kind of suspect. I can see the historical context of that. Virgil apparently, in some sources, named Pasco after a brutal sandblasted town down in Argentina that he experienced, also named Pasco. And the Tri-Cities reminded him of that barren moonscape. But I've also heard that Pasco was named by a Central American worker who was living there, who recommended it because it reminded him of his home. And then I've also heard that it was named Pasco because it was named Pacific Shipping Co.'s port, because ships would go up the Columbia River, meet the train in Pasco, and then could send barges either upriver or tall ships back downriver. As with all things, honestly, the truth is probably somewhere in the middle. So you can decide for yourselves. But yes, he does have a fantastic mustache, and equally cool is the font I've chosen to use today. So thank you, everyone. And yeah, Reed, thank you for bringing that up. The Chihuly chandelier is inside Union Station today. It is one of many Chihuly glass installations inside Union Station. He also has a series of their spears, reeds. Fittingly enough, thank you, Reed. Also, his basket art is displayed in the windows down there. So they tried to revitalize the art scene in it while also refurbishing it to look like a original train station down there. So Virgil, he's a badass. That's all you really need to know thus far. This is part of the survey crew with the Northern Pacific Railroad at the time. who went out, and what they eventually established under the keen leadership of Virgil there is that kind of like finding the truth in historic context is that honest answers were somewhere in the middle. And so they were like, well, we're going to need to tunnel through this mountain, but we can also build a switchback over the majority of it. And that's what they decided to do. So the first thing was to build a switchback over the North Cascades, which again, if you've ever gone over I-90, you can imagine what an insane task that was. Enter Nelson Bennett. Now, Nelson Bennett is another engineer who has just a ton of clout in the city of Tacoma. I think he's probably going to be most well known for that tunnel pictured here. If you remember back in the day, and it wasn't that long ago, going around Point Ruston, out where the Ruston Fantasy Complex is today, you used to go through this tunnel and you'd had to like wait, honk, make sure that you didn't collide with anyone. That tunnel and the train tunnel that still exists out there were both Nelson Bennett contributions to the city of Tacoma. He's also was the proud owner of that mansion that you see there on the left. Unfortunately, the Bennett mansion is no longer in Tacoma today. Almost everything else you see in that picture, including the buried light rail tracks there. The Union Club is in the back there. The North Pacific Terminus building is the one with the round top, straight in the middle there. But yeah, the Bennett mansion was unfortunately destroyed. It was a casualty of historic progress. May it rest in peace. I was going to show you a picture of what's there today, but I don't want to. It's going to break your heart. It's an apartment complex, and you know, not quite the same attention to detail, let's say. So Nelson Bennett employs his younger brother, and they together are responsible for constructing the tunnel that's going to go through Stampede Pass, which in itself is a cool story. It was originally Garfield Pass, named for the newly elected president, President Garfield. But I believe it was Virgil Bogue who was trying to get everything surveyed. They were creating trails. They were laying track early on out there. And he had a foreman out there who just wasn't getting the job done. So he takes his most accomplished foreman, gives him a letter. He's like, by the way, this is your job now. Go out there, get it done. The foreman arrives to the camp and is like, I'm taking over. You can either work for me now or you guys don't have a job. And basically all the railroad workers that were out there were loyal to that original foreman, in no small part because he wasn't pushing them very hard. So they're like, whatever. They kind of just keep doing what they were told by the original foreman. They end up going to the cook line to get lunch in the middle of the day. And the cook, under instruction for the foreman, is like, no, I'm sorry. This food is the property of the railroad. And the foreman that you work for is no longer an employee of the railroad. And thus, you guys will not eat. The nearest town is like 100 miles that way. Please enjoy. And they stampeded back to work, put in another 3-hour shift under the instruction of the new foreman, and then came back to get their food with their new employer. And so it was a double stampede, out to work and then back to the cook line, and the name stuck. One of the workers is noted of having scrawled Stampede Pass on just a piece of wood in the area afterwards, and they loved it so much that that's what it's still called today. So the more you know. Back to our Nelson Bennett mansion here. So Bennett, he gets it done. They construct a series of trestle bridges like this, and the most daunting part of the switchbacks going up there is that to get the job done, they had to employ 2 of these steam engines. And they were the most powerful steam engines in the country. In fact, I think the world at the time. You can see here they're called decapods, and it required 2 of them to take 5 cars over the switchback. So bear with me here. You have a train with like 100 cars on it, right? You're cruising across Washington. You get to the Cascades. Now you have to unhook 5 of those cars. 2 steam engines have to, one at the front, one at the back, push it up the switchbacks, down the switchbacks, taking an hour and a half. Then they go back over, they take another 5 cars and repeat the process until the entire train has cleared the Cascades. The intense, horrible, just arduous task of getting a train across the Cascades is what motivated these people so much to get the railroad done. And then the rail line at the time, the North Pacific, essentially came to the landowners at the area and were like, by the way, you owning this land is conditional upon getting a train functionally through or over the mountain, and you're not fulfilling that task. So if it's not done soon, we're going to revoke your land claim. And a bunch of people suddenly watching dollar signs fly through the window were like, oh, shoot, let's put some infrastructure in this. And Bennett was their boy. So the Bennett brothers get going on it. And they incentivize the task by, when they start on Lincoln's birthday, February 12th, 1886, they say that they're going to give $1,000 cash prize to the first man who crosses through the tunnel. And then whoever's team, because there was a team on the west side and a team on the east side, so whoever teams achieves it first gets steak and whiskey dinner that night at the expense of the Bennetts. So they go full bore, if you will, using essentially hand tools to chisel holes into the rock face and then filling them with dynamite and deploying it. And in the beginning, they have to just use like hammers and picks to get through there and then dynamite through. When you look at the injuries and the fatalities of this experience, it was something like 17 killed, 23 injured, something along those lines, and then hundreds with some sort of minor injury. The greatest fatalities, though, rested squarely on the shoulders of the Chinese laborers. And we will never know how high that cost was, because the arrangement that the Northern Pacific Railroad and the Bennetts had with the Chinese government at the time was that they wouldn't record any deaths of Chinese laborers who died while constructing the railroad, but they would ship the bodies home to China. And to the best of our knowledge, that agreement was kept. But it really emphasizes the fact that, especially at the time, the railroad and those who were in charge of it felt that the Chinese were incredibly disposable, which is horrifying, but also deeply tragic in the context of the fact that it was primarily the Chinese crews putting in the actual physical labor to construct these lines, but also their elite team of, they were called firecracker men, were responsible for setting the charges, lighting them, and then clearing the tunnel before they themselves would have been blown up. And it was by far the most dangerous job out there. And yes, in case anyone was curious, my son, who's 4, Holden, could tell me basically everything about that steam train. There's nothing that he doesn't know about trains at this point. It's absolutely astonishing. So here they are essentially taking wood up and down to create these trestles. And if you know anything about engineering or trains, I'll give you a little info here. The trestle bridge was constructed with a 5% grade. Even modern trains, the most aggressive grade you can really take is 2.2%. But they managed, with those 2 enormous steam engines, to get trains up a 5% grade, which is, for lack of a better word, astonishing at the time. Let's see if I've got my, so here's a lot of the European immigrant and Chinese crews that would have been working in tandem to construct that. And then here we go. This is the predominantly Chinese crew responsible for laying those tracks. And so what you see right there is they're actually laying the rails down in the middle of winter, rushing through to get this project done. So the project starts in 1886, and then by March of 1888, they hear the first blast. A West Coast team heard the blast coming from the east of the Cascades, and they knew that they were getting close. And 6 weeks from when they heard that blast, they managed to tunnel through, and it was a free-for-all. The east side and the west side both sent the smallest and meanest man that they had on their team to make a dash for it. And it was a very small hole at this point, but they had to climb up because the tunnel is, I think, 21 feet on average throughout. They had to go to the high section where they were tunneling through and then fight inside the hole to see who was going to make it through. Both of them were grappling for it, trying to pass to the other side before the other one did. But eventually the miner from the west side headbutted the other guy, pushed him to the side, and managed to scramble through, just blood all over, and arrived officially claiming victory for the west side crew. They all got steak and whiskey. He got $1,000, and I have not been able to find where his name was recorded, if it was at all. They're probably just like, Jenkins, good job. Here's your notes. I imagine they didn't pay him in gold eagles at the time. And enjoy a round on us, which frankly sounds like a wonderful idea. The train that you are seeing right here is Sita. She was named by Nelson Bennett for, get this, his fourth daughter. Nelson and his wife Lottie had 5 daughters. Sita was his fourth, and I guess his favorite, because he named all of his trains after her. And the Sita train was the first locomotive to pass through the entirety of the Cascades underneath. Lottie, however, Lottie Lottie Bennett, his wife, has the distinguished honor of having been the first woman to pass through the Cascade Tunnel. Right after those miners got in a brawl for it, they enlarged the hole just a little, and hiking up her hoop skirt and plowing on through, walked through just a couple days after the hole had been actually formed through the Cascades, crawled through on the rock, and walked the entire 2 miles in some horrific outfit, absolutely not at all appropriate for spelunking or mountaineering, and she made it happen. So well done, Lottie. Here's to you. Once the tunnel was completed, the real work really began on creating the infrastructure to maintain it. And once she was through and everyone was bolstering the walls, creating the trail line through there, they really got to work, and it was operational within basically, I think, 2 weeks of them having created the hole. So here's a celebratory photo of the crew. They tried to shuffle the Chinese to the back as much as they could, and they're like, good job, us. We have created the finest piece of civil engineering in the state of Washington. And they weren't wrong. When you look at the historic photos of this, it doesn't quite do it justice. They were still milling the timber out there so they could continue constructing trestles and the interior of the walls down there. But one of the things that made the Stampede Pass Tunnel so extraordinary, too, was that the way it was built is it's arched. So it's 1888, right? They start in 1886. It takes 2 years to complete this project. And what blows my mind, just as an individual, is that they were able to survey it, and they were like, all right, we're going to start tunneling from both sides, and we're going to meet in the middle. And they freaking did it. And not only did they do it, but the tunnel isn't bore-sided. The majority of train tunnels in the United States are bore-sided, which means that the floor of the tunnel is level or straight throughout. So it starts at a high peak, it ends at a low peak. With the Stampede Tunnel, it's one of the few examples where it's arched. So if you're in the middle, you can't see daylight on either end. It's completely dark. And this ended up being a benefit for the tunnel due to ventilation, but it's also just a marvel that they could hit that mark while just like guessing, essentially. They did the mathematics on it. And that's just a reminder that you should stick to your STEM program, kids. So here we go. From Tacoma History Live, 17 men killed, 17 more maimed by rock falls, mechanical errors, or explosions. 11 more died, with 22 injured. And that was on, I believe, the east side. So the west side was by far the more dangerous of that and did employ I think at its peak, roughly 2,000 Chinese laborers. And again, no note as to how many of them were injured or killed in their various occupational hazards. Here is one of the early looks. This is a drafting map of what that tunnel looks like as it runs through the Cascades. To give you a more easily digestible look, here you go. So here's the Cascade Range with Stampede Pass, with its peak just over 5,300 feet up in the air above sea level. With a maximum grade, they achieved the 2.2%, so you could take any train through without complications. And you can see the grade changes throughout, but just absolutely bananas to think that they tunneled under that much rock and managed to survive with the majority of their people coming back out. And actually, here's just a fun fact. That's true. Reed, they did do aqueducts. Also, one of my favorite things about the Romans and their engineering is that to mine a mountain, they had a very similar approach to what you're looking at here, where they could actually tunnel underneath a mountain. They would do a series of shafts beneath it. I've gone completely off the rails here. Train pun. And the Romans would then build a dam somewhere nearby. And after they had completed the tunnels underneath the mountain, they would release the dam, flooding the subterranean tunnels beneath that mountain section there. And it would actually destroy the mountain. The way that it would hit and flood it, it would just level the mountain, and then they could go through the slag and pick up any of the minerals that they wanted without drilling additional shafts. So they were literally moving mountains. Really not great for the environment, but as far as like ancient engineering, whoo, you gotta put a gold star next to the Romans for that. So there you go, going through. Now, what I love about this whole thing is that the Stampede tunnel is still operational. It went through a brief period where they were like, ugh, this sucker's old. We don't need it anymore. It only goes 2 miles. And to that argument, north of Interstate 90, Highway 2 over Stevens Pass, in the 1920s, the Snoqualmie, or not the Snoqualmie Tunnel. No, I believe it's the Snoqualmie Tunnel. I've finally been stumped on something. Snoqualmie Tunnel was constructed, and it was the longest train tunnel in the country, just over 9 miles. And so that is the tunnel that they continue to use today for passenger trains. And when they built it, they were like, well, we don't need to send freight trains or anything through the Stampede Tunnel anymore. And they shuttered the project. But the downside to the Snoqualmie Tunnel being so long is that it becomes toxic. As soon as you send a train inside, it fills with toxic diesel fumes, and they can't force the air out quick enough for a train to go through after. So this is true about the Snoqualmie Tunnel. As once a train enters it, they have these mechanical doors. So let's say a train enters from the east side, right? The west side of the tunnel closes, and the train just barrels towards that closed door until it's getting close. The door opens, and the train rushes out. And while it's in there with the door closed, they're venting the fumes out as best they can, trying to create suction. Once the train exits, they close that door, open the other one, and they use high-powered fans, 2 800 horsepower fans, to blow the exhaust out, taking approximately 1.5 hours to do so. And then another train can enter. So if you've ever ridden the Empire Builder through or across the state of Washington through that tunnel, you have been enclosed in that tunnel for a long period of time as they try to vent those toxic fumes. Because this is laborious and ridiculous, they decided that they were going to end up reusing the Stampede Tunnel. And I want to address something here. I believe you're half correct, Jessica. There are 2 Snoqualmie tunnels. There's one that runs 9 miles, if I'm not mistaken, and then they created an additional tunnel, I believe a decade later, that goes 2.3 miles. On that part, you are correct. But if I am wrong, I would love to be called out right now, because I am not as knowledgeable as my son Holden on trains, but I do my best. So Snoqualmie tunnels are in operation. The Stampede tunnel is still in operation, but it is a single track tunnel to this day and is only operational for freight trains, which are entirely run by Burlington Northern Santa Fe through the area. But this is one of the pictures that they had from freight trains that were running through in the late 60s. After they became less used on that route, they shuttered that project. But this is my transition into the town of Leicester, which is a ghost town. And because it's me, I had to create some segues into at least ghost stories and ghost towns for this whole tour. Because while I love Stampede Pass, and I think its importance to the area can't be overstated, it has created so much more than just a huge economic influx into Tacoma. Like I was saying earlier, so many of those towns in the area sprung up because of the railroad. And in fact, if you just look at a map of Washington State, you'll notice that the majority of notable towns just creates sort of a meandering arc straight through the middle of the state. And that's not a coincidence. Booming metropolitan areas like Tacoma and Spokane were both major railroad towns. In fact, it's pretty well confirmed at this point that Butch Cassidy faked his death in South America and then actually retired in Spokane, where he spent the majority of his wealth until he died of natural causes. I will put some links to that because that's a wild story in and of itself. And one of the last members of the Hole in the Wall gang was killed just outside of Elmira, Washington, where my people are from. So the railroad meanders its way across Washington State, but a lot of those towns dried up and have been forgotten, and not the least of which, here we go. Thank you, Jessica. So there it is. We've got more information there. Whew. The town of Leicester. So Leicester is just on the west side of the Stampede Pass train tunnel. And I've got some photos for it because I believe it was last occupied in 2002. I'm going to have to double check on that one there. But it was constructed in, I think, 1892, early 1890s. It was primarily a logging town, but was fueled by the economy of the railroad, right? So they wanted to mill as much timber in the area so they can continue to build and maintain the train lines out there. But it ended up being a town that people lived in until 2002, I think was the last year. And that's when the last woman who was living in that town passed away. Basically, everyone else had moved out at that time. And so this is what was left of Leicester. And I love that you can see how little the buildings had changed really in their just over 100-year lifespan out there. This is just a fantastic shot of one of the rail depot. I believe this was used for a mail carry and signal station for a period of time as well. And you can see some of the great photos there. In case you're planning on hiking out to Leicester anytime soon, I should warn you that all of this land is owned by Tacoma Power and Water. And in, I think, 2018, officially, they demolished the last of these buildings. So these shots are the last sort of look at the area there. All right, here we have clarification. Thank you, Greg, for settling this dispute. I was talking about the Cascade tunnels just out of Stevens Pass. Snoqualmie Tunnel is the 2.31 that was closed in the 1980s. If I'm not mistaken, it's just over 9 miles for the Cascade Tunnel, but I believe there are still 2 of those as well, built at different lengths. One is significantly longer from the 1920s, and that is the one that the Empire Builder runs on. Again, this is the best part of having live interactive tours, is because there's absolutely no way for me to remain in command of all of the fringe knowledge out here. So I'm gonna focus my talents on Stampede Pass and Tunnel, the town of Leicester here, and boom, Ben Brooks coming in for the final goal. Thank you very much. Okay. So yeah, again, these are the last shots that you really get to see of the town of Leicester before it was officially demolished. But if you're looking for a cool ghost town that sort of gives you an opportunity to see these tunnels, and in particular the snow sheds, Wellington is my recommendation for you. And it is sort of a sad story for the town of Wellington. But Wellington popped up again in the late 1880s. It was a rail town for loggers, railroad workers, and then had a hotel, actually, because it was a major stop for people if they didn't want to do the entire journey all the way through. And I think I've got a shot of that hotel for you guys right here. But this is the tunnel as it is today in Wellington. This is a Washington Parks and Trails maintained area now. So you can walk in this tunnel here. You can see it's got sort of unstable ground to walk on, but the trail itself, which runs through the snow shed here, as you can see, is incredibly well maintained. But yeah, Wellington is part of the Iron Goat Trail. It was one of those original rail lines as the train went back and forth across the Cascades. And they would stop here at this hotel. And it was in 1910, if I'm not mistaken, that there was a train stopped out here. And it was early in the year, I believe February that they were stopped out here. And they had to stop in the middle of the night because a 9-day storm, a blizzard, had just been destroying the area. And they couldn't get a train through the area until someone had gone through and cleared the tracks. And so everyone was basically just sleeping on board the train for the night. And they're like, it's all right, we'll get going in the morning. And in the middle of the night, a combination of a sudden warm breeze coming through, creating heavy rainfall on the top of that area, and then thunder triggered the single deadliest avalanche on the West Coast, almost completely destroying the town of Wellington, and 93 people died in the avalanche. Almost every single person who was aboard the train, and the majority of people were railroad employees who ended up perishing in that avalanche. And it took them 21 days to end up recovering the majority of those remains and to get them out of the area. And it was by far the most tragic event that had ever happened in the area, certainly to Wellington, and was such a blight on the name of the area that they end up changing their name just surreptitiously in the night. I think by October of 1910, just months after this incident, they changed the name of the town to Tye, T-Y-E, and just tried to erase the history of it altogether. And you can see there's some fantastic photos of the ghost town, but also of just the tragedy of the crash as it happened out there. And again, a lot of the people after they were hit by the avalanche perished instantly, but then their remains were out there for up to 21 days. Now, the spooky part is, yes, people get all sorts of weird energy and feelings when they're out there. And the majority of that wreck is still out there. In fact, there was no real attempt made by the railroad at the time to recover any part of that train because it was utterly destroyed and it would have been very expensive. So where the train lay, the majority of those pieces are still out there today, rusted and derelict. And so you can go out as part of the Iron Goat Trail and hike this area. And if you go out, you will encounter parts of that train wreck out there. And there are all sorts of different accounts of people feeling presences, hearing stuff when they're out there, or just feeling like an intense cold, even at the peak of summer when they're walking on the trail out there. Now, they constructed not long after that this snow shed that you're looking at in the historic picture right here. And that was to prevent tragedies like this from happening again. So you'll notice a great deal of snow sheds throughout the area. In fact, when I showed you guys the Google Earth photo of the Stampede tunnel up here, you can see they have quite a long snow shed here. And that one in particular is because of this very famous waterfall, which is in the back section here. That's in a lot of the historic photos as well of Stampede Tunnel. And you can see that the creek actually runs right underneath the rail line out this direction. But this long snow shed outside of our ghost town still exists out here in the area. So if you are going to go hike in Wellington, you can actually take the trail through the remnant of that 15 snow shed out there. Now this one is of the Stampede Tunnel. You can see the snow shed on, this is the eastern section there, and you can see that telltale waterfall cascading in the background there. Good question, Julian. No other towns were close enough to that area to be really impacted by the avalanche. It was basically just Wellington, then Ty, that bore the whole tragedy of that. And it was the deadliest avalanche, like I said, in the nation, just based on how many casualties happened in that very small rail town out there. This is of that same, so there's quite a lot of like back roads mountaineering that goes on in the Stampede area. And what I wanted to show you really quick was the area itself, because it's gorgeous. So if you take the Forest Service road out there, and you want to ride your sexy bike like this guy did, you can actually go out up along these switchback trails and then ride the roads out on Stampede Pass. And believe it or not, this section here is one of the less maintained roads. You'll see the significantly better ones down a little ways. But yeah, you can go out and explore this area and get very close to the tunnels. It is vastly important for me to remind you at this point that they are both functional train tunnels. So please do not enter them. The likelihood of you getting hit by a freight train is incredibly high. So this is your official warning for Pretty Gritty Tours and myself. Don't enter train tunnels unless they're completely unoccupied. So yeah, the town of Alpine, not too far, was where they had to go to get the telegraph out, because again, everything in the town of Wellington had been destroyed by that avalanche. So to request additional help, they had to go through that snow out there. And there have been multiple instances where avalanches in the area, both Stampede, Snoqualmie, and the Cascade tunnels have been affected. And trains have either had to wait inside the tunnels for the storm to pass, and then had to shut down everything because, again, they fill with toxic fumes, or had to just not attempt it at all. And I've got a clip for you here, if I could share it with you really quick, of a train going up into the tunnel, and it gives you an idea of just how much freight they shuffle through even today. So you can see these are extraordinarily large trains. And this one, if I'm not mistaken, trying to remember if it was a good point where it actually, so this right here is where it would be coming up around the bend to enter into the tunnel. But it doesn't want to play tonight, so that's totally fine. That's on it. So back here we go. This is looking at Stampede Pass from the street view. And then back up here from the Google Earth view. And again, if you go off of I-90, you can take the exit towards Whittier. If you punch in Martin, that's the closest you can get. And that'll take you to the Meany Lodge area. And there's a great deal of trails out here. And the Meany Lodge area is really popular for snowshoers and skiers, actually. So if you're going to go explore the Stampede tunnel area, Stampede Pass, and you don't want to go off-roading in your vehicle, you just want to do some winter sports, that's a fantastic area to sort of get back to that like original rail line cutting through the heart of the state. So with that, right here, we've got the sort of origin of it all. This is original Old Town Tacoma. And some of you may recognize this photo. This was also in our Chinatown tour as well, because those shacks up front there are the beginning structures of Tacoma's historic Chinatown, which of course is no longer here today, after it was burned to the ground on November 3rd, 1885, by an angry mob of people led by the mayor of Tacoma. That's a story that we have online for you guys if you didn't catch it the first time. But it is because of Tacoma and the industrious surveying of Virgil Bogue, the hard work of over 2,000 Chinese laborers, and the entrepreneurial attitude of the Bennett brothers that we have Stampede Tunnel today. And I think it's a testament to the fact that it is still an operational freight trade tunnel. Just how incredible that feat of engineering was that even today, they found that it really can't be done that much better. So with that, if you guys have enjoyed yourself, you have any questions, please put them in the comments below. I do my best to answer everything as much as I can. If you guys have enjoyed your tour and you feel like you want to show it, you can always leave a tip for your guide on prettygrittytours.com. There is a PayPal button right on the front of the page there. And as always, deeply appreciated, but entirely unnecessary. Hopefully within the next few hours, we should be releasing our updated dates for our live walking tours, small groups only. We're going to be doing our ghost tour and a few other things downtown Tacoma, as well as our new stuff in Old Town and South Tacoma, both of which I'm very excited for. So keep your eyes peeled for that. And then we are going to have a new list of virtual tours continuing throughout August, released here very soon. But I myself am about to go on a camping trip through the Cascades, so wish me luck. We're taking the very finest of people who have not gone on a backpacking trip before. So I'm excited to watch their virgin eyes light up as they see Kolchak Lake for the first time and marvel at the enchantments. So here we go. Thank you guys so much. I'm Chris Staudinger with Pretty Gritty Tours. Enjoy your evening, and as always, keep on exploring.